Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Test Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if your brain S speed affects your ability to remember things? This new study dives deep into that very question. So you know how some people just seem to think faster than others, that S processing speed, and then their S working memory capacity, which is like your brain S temporary notepad. How much information you can hold and juggle at once. Scientists have noticed for a while that these two things seem connected. People who are faster thinkers often also have a bigger mental notepad. But why? A popular idea is something called the binding hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that both your brain S speed and your working memory capacity rely on a part of your brain that manages how to do things, how to link actions to things you see, like stimulus-response bindings. If this is true, then making these action links harder or more complex should make the connection between your processing speed and working memory even stronger. But here's the thing, not everyone agrees. Some studies have found that idea to be true, while others haven't. So, the researchers in this study wanted to test it more carefully. They wondered if the correlation between processing speed and working memory would get bigger when the tasks made it harder to manage these action links. They designed a clever experiment. They created processing speed tasks where people had to make quick decisions. There were two main ways they changed the tasks. One way was to keep the rules for responding the same throughout the whole task. For instance, if you saw a letter, you always pressed the left button for vowels and the right for consonants. They called this consistent mapping. The other way was to make the rules change from trial to trial. So, one moment pressing left for a vowel might be correct, but the very next moment pressing left for a consonant might be the right thing to do. The participants were shown icons at the start of each trial to remind them of the current rule. This changing mapping made the task much more demanding on working memory because you had to constantly update and remember the current rules and ignore the old ones. They also used different types of things to decide on letters, numbers, and words. Then they had participants do several working memory tasks to measure their actual working memory capacity. After collecting all this data, they used fancy statistical tools, specifically something called Bayesian structural equation models, to see how the processing speed scores in the consistent tasks related to working memory, and how the processing speed scores in the changing tasks related to working memory. So, what did they find? Drumroll please. They found no significant difference in how strongly processing speed was related to working memory capacity between the easy rule tasks and the hard rule tasks. The correlation was basically the same, whether the rules were consistent or changing. Interestingly, the processing speed tasks themselves, even with different rules, were still highly correlated with each other. This means that whatever was making someone fast in the consistent task was also making them fast in the changing task, and vice versa. This finding doesn't support the binding hypothesis. If a harder task was supposed to make the link stronger, we should have seen a bigger correlation in the changing rule tasks, but that didn't happen. So, what does this mean? The researchers suggest that maybe the tasks they designed didn't create a strong enough difference in the working memory demand between the consistent and changing rules. Or perhaps the tasks were too simple in some ways, like having only 2 rules at a time, which might not have taxed working memory enough. They even mentioned that previous studies that found stronger links often used tasks with more rules. Another possibility they bring up is that maybe processing speed and working memory rely on different parts of your brain's memory system. While processing speed tasks might focus on how you execute actions, working memory tasks often involve remembering information about things, like numbers or colors in specific places. Even if these systems are similar, individual differences in how well they work might not perfectly align in a way that makes the correlation much stronger when one of them faces a challenge. In a nutshell, this study found that making simple decision tasks harder by changing the rules didn't make them more strongly related to a person's working memory capacity. This challenges the idea that the binding hypothesis, which focuses on managing action rules, fully explains why processing speed and working memory are connected. It seems like other underlying factors, things that are generally true about how efficiently your brain works, might be more responsible for the connection between processing speed and working memory than specifically how hard it is to manage the rules of a task. Future research could explore if using more complex tasks with more rules, or perhaps different ways of measuring these cognitive abilities might reveal a stronger link. So, what is my take on this? I think it is really cool that researchers are trying to pinpoint exactly why our brains work the way they do. This study, by not finding what some theories predicted, actually pushes the science forward by telling us what might not be the whole story. It highlights how tricky it is to isolate and measure specific cognitive processes. The fact that the processing speed tasks themselves were still so correlated, regardless of the rule changes, is a big clue that there are some fundamental individual differences in how fast people process information that are pretty stable. What does this mean for us? Well, it doesn't mean your brain speed and your memory aren't related. They clearly are. And this study confirms that, but it suggests that simply making a task a bit more complex might not automatically create a stronger bond between these two abilities. It might be that the connection is driven by more general cognitive efficiencies, rather than just the demand on managing specific SR binds. It also tells us that when we think about cognitive tasks, the specific design and complexity can really matter in how they relate to other abilities. What is next? As the researchers suggest, looking at tasks with more rules or different combinations of cognitive demands could be really fruitful. Also, understanding how the different parts of working memory, like holding information versus manipulating it, might interact with processing speed in various scenarios is a big open question. Thanks for tuning into RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you enjoyed this dive into cognitive science, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration. See you next time.